All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting from February 26, 2020. The first item on our agenda is a consideration of minutes from the regular meeting on January 22nd, 2020. Those minutes were provided to the board members. Are there any changes necessary to those? Hearing none, those will stand as submitted. The next item on our agenda is an item of old business. It was deferred from the last meeting. It's a special use permit, application Z20001 by Mr. Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel, representing Enterprise Holdings. They're requesting a special use permit in order to establish motor vehicle sales and rental facility. And this is for property in the Commercial Highway District located along the south side of Franklin Road, east of Franklin Heights Drive. Mr. Ware, I believe this is your application, if you'll.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this case was deferred until this month to review the site plan more and to ensure that the neighbors to the adjacent to the property was adequately buffered from the property and from the use. We have reviewed the site plan, and if the board approves, we recommend the following conditions of approval. A site plan shall be submitted to the planning department for review and approval. The site plan shall include architectural elevations and demonstrate compliance with all requirements of the zoning ordinance and design guidelines. The design of the gates will be subject to the final review and approval of the planning department to ensure that there are adequate turnaround areas for vehicles and to ensure that vehicles will not be forced back into the public right-of-way. And a privacy fence and earthen berm shall be required along the south and west property lines. The privacy fence and berm shall not be a substitute for any of the standard type E buffer yard plantings. Rather, it should be in addition to the standard type E buffer yard plantings.
And I would add, Chairman Young and members of the board, we did sit down and meet with the applicant and their design team shortly after the last BZA meeting to discuss the concerns that were brought up at the last BZA meeting, and we have had adequate time to review their plans this time around. They did add, as Mr. Ware mentioned, they did add an earthen berm with the conditions on site. They were able to get a 2.7-foot earthen berm to include within that 20-foot type E buffer yard, both on the west and south property lines. So they're kind of doing a threefold plan to mitigate the negative impacts on the adjacent neighborhood. The 20-foot type E buffer, the 2.7-foot tall earthen berm, and the 6-foot privacy fence. Now, the fence and the berm, as Mr. Ware mentioned, are in addition to the standard buffer yard plantings, not in lieu of any of those plantings. So they're kind of being triply sure that they are working towards to mitigating any negative impacts. They also relocated the dumpster so that it was a little further away from the adjacent neighborhood. So it's actually closer to, but not oriented to face the new public street along the eastern property line. But we felt that it was probably more important to get it further away from the neighbors than it would be to get it further away from that new public right-of-way. So they have also, their plans show a little bit different parking layout too. We've specified the maximum number of, based on their layout, the maximum number of vehicles that they can have for sale and rent on the property at any one time. And we feel comfortable that they're meeting the standards the standards that are specific for motor vehicle sales facilities in our zoning ordinance. I'll be happy to answer any questions, as will Mr. Ware. There's no requirement for another public hearing, as we had the public hearing for this matter last month. Mr. Bill Huddleston and Mr. Clyde Roundtree from Huddleston Steel are here as our representatives of Enterprise Holdings as well.
All right. Thank you. Questions for Matthew?
The only question I have is just a curiosity question. Is the fence on top of this earthen berm or in the middle between the berm and the trees, or
The fence is actually on the outside, closer to the property line. I think
Okay.
the fence is not so much for visual screening as it is to be an actual physical barrier
Okay.
in between the car lot and the adjacent neighborhood.
All right, anything further from Matthew or staff? Anything else the applicant would like to add? Mr. Roundtree, y'all have any additional? All right.
If there are no further questions, I make a motion that we approve, subject to all of the staff comments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application's been approved. Next, we'll move on to new business. Have a couple of variance requests. The first one is application Z20005 by Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC Inc. for Mr. Eric Bloom. They're requesting a 19-foot variance from the minimum required 25-foot rear building setback for principal structures. This is for property located in the residential multifamily RM16 zone at 627 East Street. Mr. Barbie, I believe that's your application?
Thank you, Chairman Young. Yes, the application is for a 19-foot variance from the required 25-foot rear setback to construct a new two-story duplex that'll be approximately 2,280 square feet. The current structure will be demolished and replaced with the new structure. The applicant contends that the building envelope that would be remaining under the current setbacks and the current zoning is just too restrictive. It would only leave about a 25-foot depth building envelope for any new structure. The current structure that's there predates our existing zoning ordinance and doesn't meet the current setback itself, as well as most of the properties along the western side of East Street. Most of those properties don't currently meet the present setback as well. So we suspect as those properties, if they are to redevelop, they'll have a very similar problem as well. If the board does approve this request, we do have one condition of approval, and that's that a site plan will be submitted to the planning department for administrative review and approval prior to the issuance of a building permit. I believe the applicant is in attendance here to answer any questions, and be happy to answer any questions you may have as well.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this point?
Is this within the purview of the areas that are being reconsidered for like the historic or the downtown changes and variances or in setbacks?
The city core overlay district.
Yes, thank
It
you
is
for clarifying.
no problem.
what I was trying to say.
No problem. It is right outside of the boundaries of the city core overlay district.
Are these homes, is this area in a similar circumstance as the city overlay?
When we looked at expanding the city core overlay district, the decision was made not to include the streets that are along or that are just to the east or the west of campus, like Fairview, Eaton, Ewing, Crestland, and East Street, West Street. And I don't know that I have a good reason why those were not included. It may be something that we need to look at in the future. If we, one of the things, if we get more requests like this, it may be something, when there are numerous variance requests, that should lead us to ponder whether or not we need to amend the ordinance. In this case, the Mr. Barbie, just to reiterate what he said, the lots on the east side or the west side of East Street are all very shallow. Most of the structures, if you look at the aerial photo, if we could put that aerial photo up, most of the homes on the east side are very close to the that rear property line. This lot was platted in 1946, prior to the adoption of our current zoning ordinance in 1984, and prior to I believe Murfreesboro didn't even have zoning until the 50s, I think. So with them wanting to redevelop the lot and tear down the existing structure that's on the lot and rebuild, makes it very difficult with the current lot depth and the existing setbacks, leaving only about a 25-foot deep building envelope.
It appears reminiscent to those that we were seeing prior to
Yeah.
the contemplation of the city overlay district.
Yes. And you know, I'd be, you know, I would be mistaken if I didn't say there's some amount of arbitrariness, I guess, in where we put, it's always going to be a little bit arbitrary where we put those boundaries. And, you know, there may be something right on the other side of those boundaries that may, you know, hindsight, we may have said maybe we should have added a couple of extra streets in there, but, and that may be the case after we have a few more years to contemplate our current city core overlay boundaries that were just adopted, to see if we need to expand that in the future.
Okay.
It's a good question. I had to do a double take when we got or when we met with Mr. Taylor and Mr. Bloom, say, oh, is that in the city core overlay district? It's like literally right outside of it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Taylor, is there anything you'd like to add to the application for us?
No, sir. I think that Mr. Barbie and Mr. Blomley both did an excellent job describing the situation and why we're here. So it's, I think it's just a difficult situation, and I think it's unique at the time, right now, and it maybe be solved in the future with an ordinance amendment. But we do appreciate your consideration, and we'll be happy to answer anything that you have for us.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
It's not a question, it's just an observation. In looking at this request, if my math's right, and looking at both plats between the proposed and existing building, we're only talking about 1.5 feet difference of where the existing structure is today versus what you're proposing. So, just comment.
Thanks. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward and give us your name and address and give us any comments you may have. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve this request subject to the administrative review and approval of the building permit.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That application has been approved. Next, we'll move to application Z20006 by Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC for Racetrack. They're making the following requests regarding a proposed solid waste enclosure for property located in a commercial highway zone at the northeast corner of Shelbyville Pike and Tiger Hill. I guess there's two components to this application. The first is a variance from the zoning ordinance, which states that in commercial zoning districts, accessory structures shall comply with the same front setback as is required for the principal structure. And the second portion is a 33-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front setback of the zoning ordinance. Mr. Ware, I believe this is your application?
Yes, sir. As you said, the subject parcel is at the corner of Shelbyville Pike and Tiger Hill. The subject parcel has 3 frontages at Christie Knobway, Tiger Hill, and as I said, Shelbyville Pike. The subject parcel is in the commercial highway zoning district. A gas station is permitted by right in the commercial highway zoning district. The variance would be, if the board would approve the variance, it would basically be allowed to allow the dumpster enclosure, solid waste enclosure, to be 9 feet away from the front setback, and also that would be included in that first variance request that requires the front accessory structures to have the same front and side setback as a principal structure. The solid waste enclosure would be primarily would be made of masonry and of building material. The size would be 12 feet. 12 feet by 20.4 feet, and it would be 60 feet lower than the roadway at the intersection of Tiger Hill and Christie Knob Way. If I pull up the slide here, and you can see some of the pictures. So as you can see, this is the subject parcel looking north from Tiger Hill. The dumpster enclosure will go at the intersection of Tiger Hill and Christie Knob Way. It would be below the, like I said, 16 feet below the roadway, so it wouldn't be very visible from the roadway. And the applicant states the reason why the dumpster enclosure needs to go in that place, in that area, is because it would be more visible anywhere else on the property, as it has 3 frontages, and also it would be more visible from the road if it's placed behind the principal structure. And I can answer any questions if you have any.
Anyone have questions for staff? The first component of this is just because of the 2 front yards issue.
So whenever we have a variance request, sometimes there are kind of 2 parts of the zoning ordinance that say the same thing, and so we try to make sure we hit everything just to keep these guys happy over here.
Yes.
I'm pointing to you. But yeah, it's just a belts and suspenders approach, as it were.
Okay.
Everybody knows I like to use that phrase.
Right. So that's
And I believe that Mr. Taylor has some additional information that he can provide as well.
all right.
Good afternoon, Matt Taylor from SEC. Mr. Blomley's right, and Mr. Ware did a good job describing what we're requesting. I did want to go in a little more detail of why the site is, I think, special for our commercial site in Murfreesboro. It's got about 25 foot of fall from the front of this, or from the rear to the front toward the street, and so that, you know, I might have 200 acres that doesn't have 25 foot of fall in Murfreesboro, and so this location is very unique in that aspect. Most of our commercial sites especially are very flat. If you drive up and down Medical Center, most of those I would describe as about 2% or less, and that's because you're putting a flat area on that land. And so I think the uniqueness of the grade here drives that, and then also having 3 front setbacks. I can only think of a couple of instances in town that you've got 3 public streets all the way around you like that, and so I think that makes that unique as well. And so what we tried to do, because we couldn't fit everything inside the setbacks and make those compliant, is find the least obtrusive location on the site. And so I think we've got a couple of renderings that we had done from a couple of the street views that should be in your packet.
Taylor, try Control L.
Control L. There you go. Your controls are different than mine. So this view here is on Christie Knob Way, which is the street that's in the back that parallels 231. And you can see we've got our dumpster and our parking really put into the hillside there, and then planting, of course, the required shrubbery and trees to block that view even further. And then all of these viewpoints, the next 3 slides, are all taken from as you're driving down the road at 3.5. So these are very realistic. This is from the intersection itself between Christie Knob and Tiger Hill Way. You can see that the enclosure itself is completely invisible here. And then this is on Tiger Hill Way itself, like you're driving up from 231 in that left-hand turn lane. And again, you can see how that's invisible. We evaluated several other locations for the dumpster, one of those being at the rear, kind of where you see the transformer pad on the site plan. At that location, the grade change that we were doing, I think we were going up and down with ramps about 5 or 6 different times just to be able to make those grades work. And then we also looked at it in this particular view about where that red car is sitting. But again, I think there it does not meet the intent of the ordinance or the design guidelines on those being hidden. They'd be facing directly toward the public right-of-way and more obtrusive than this location. So we think with the grade change and the 3 frontages, it's a very unique site. We're excited about the site, but we do think that it's unique. And this design is much preferred over the other alternative. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Taylor?
Just one. So looks like the elevation, if I'm looking at it correctly, back there in that corner, southeast corner where Christie Knob and Tiger Hill, that's a little over 700 foot.
Yes, sir.
And you're proposing that enclosure just below that?
So the where the dumpster would sit would be about 685.
685, okay.
And so then that enclosure wall is, I believe, 8 foot, and then we've got a retaining wall for grade change that goes around that. That's going to be in the neighborhood of about 15 or 16 feet tall right there.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
So the retaining wall is acting as a rear wall to the, or not necessarily?
I think that we actually have 2 walls. So we actually have the retaining wall itself, and then we have the dumpster wall.
Okay.
So we actually have 2 walls in there, and the primary reason for that is 2 different contractors. So we've got we'll have one person on site building the retaining wall, and then we'll bring another in that knows how to put up the brick and make the enclosure look like what we expect in Murfreesboro. And if we ever have to do maintenance on that wall, we don't have to be messing with the retaining wall too. So that's a much more permanent feature than what the dumpster wall would be.
Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. If there's anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or a motion. I assume, Matthew, we want 2 motions with this, too?
Yes, sir. I think that would be
The belt and suspenders
belts and suspenders approach.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance. Doesn't look like there's any conditions, and that there appears to be practical difficulties due to the topography. The property's physical features are unusual when compared to the other properties of the same area. The practical difficulties and the unusual characteristics are not due to a deliberate action of the landowner. And that the variance will not impair an adequate supply of light and air to the adjacent property. The variance will not unreasonably increase the congestion in public streets, and the variance will not increase the danger of fire, and the variance will not endanger the public health, safety, comfort, or morals or welfare of city residents.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that portion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that part has been approved. Next, the 33-foot variance.
I'll make a motion that we approve, subject to all the comments that Julie just made on her first motion.
You're welcome.
Any other stipulations that were included in the application by staff?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that portion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none, so that application's been approved. Next, we'll move to special use permits. The next one is an application Z20004 by Ms. Jennifer Thibodeau for Trinity Presbyterian Church. They're requesting a special use permit for the expansion of an existing institutional group assembly use, in this case a church, in a residential single-family RS-15 zone. This is for property located at 1020 North Rutherford Boulevard. The proposed expansion consists of building additions and parking lot modification. Mr. Barbie, if you'd go over that for us.
Thank you, Chairman Young. Bring to you a special use permit application for an expansion of existing institutional group assembly use in an RS-15 zone. The applicant requests permission to extend the building addition of about 1,750 square feet. And this would be sanctuary seating and classroom space. Also some parking lot changes for better circulation after the addition's been constructed. It looks like the total seating in the sanctuary will increase from 254 seats to 356 seats. That's approximately 102 seat increase. Property is located about a half a mile from MTSU, just north of Halls Hill Pike. Properties in that area are all zoned residential. The property to the east is outside of the city limits, and it's an agricultural use property. You have North Boulevard Church of Christ to the north, Rutherford Green subdivision to the south, and Jerry Green subdivision to the west. If you choose to approve this application, we do have three conditions of approval. Number one, site plan shall be submitted to the planning department for review and approval prior to the issuance of a building permit. Number two, the proposed architectural elevation shall be revised to show brick that is consistent with the existing structure. Number three, a masonry solid waste enclosure shall be constructed for the dumpster. I believe is the applicant here. Looks like the applicant is in attendance, be able to address any questions you have, as will I. I did want to mention one of our conditions was that the addition material should match the existing material, the brick. We did have an application in 2016 for a building addition to the rear of the property that did include a similar board and batten material as they're requesting today. As I recall the discussions, the difference is because the addition in 2016 was at the rear of the building and not as visible as this will be, that's why the board and batten material was approved in 2016. The request of staff this year is for that new building to match what's existing on the main structure.
Okay. Any additional questions for staff?
How practical is that for them to match the brick?
I'm not sure that's something that I can answer.
All right, sure. If you come to the podium, sir, and give us your name and any comments you may have.
My name is Rick Thurman with Trinity Group. We did the addition he mentioned to the back of the building in 2016, 2017. And the reason we ended up using board and batten in the rear is we were unable to match the brick. We had the brick companies come out, try to figure out what it was. I think the building was originally built in the 90s, 97, we think. And we could not find one that matched in both color and texture that looked good enough that we felt comfortable using it. If we cannot do what's on the drawing, we've tried to think of other options that we could do besides the board and batten. We could try to do a complementary brick. As a matter of fact, if you look on the drawing, we're hoping when we're going to have to demolish the end of the building to do the expansion. We are going to try to salvage enough brick that we can, on the front of the building, match the existing brick. So we're going to be gently taking that brick down, trying to get all the mortar off. We're hoping for volunteer labor, so if you guys aren't doing anything that weekend, be happy to give you something to do. But hopefully we can salvage enough to at least get some on the front, and if you look, we even have a line of brick around the bottom of the wall just to sort of tie everything together. Hopefully we can salvage at least that much brick. Beyond that, there's just not enough brick to do the rest of it. If board and batten is not acceptable, maybe we could come up with a complementary brick that would be a contrast, but hopefully go with it. And if that doesn't work, possibly paint the brick a complementary color. That would work, but I just don't think we're going to be able to match what's there, because in 2016 we were not able to find it. So that's our issue with that one requirement.
Thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant? I don't think so. Thank you, sir.
All right.
This time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? If you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or motion.
And one, maybe an olive branch, if you will. I don't know that we necessarily have to iron out the details of the architecture today, but one thing that I would say, if you all would give us the leeway to work with them, understanding their difficulties finding the brick. I think that our design guidelines envision the fiber cement siding like they're showing for the board and batten siding as more of a complementary material than a primary material. And so I think we're not saying that you can't use the board and batten at all, but I think we're saying that should be a complementary material instead of a primary material on that new facade. But we will be happy to work with them during the site plan review process to work on alternatives, maybe kind of meet them in the middle a little bit.
That's the only issue I have with this proposal, or with this conditions. I don't want us to get into being the brick police.
Right.
Because I think it's a little extreme. And it is, and their particular situation points that out. As long as it's something complimentary, as long as it's tasteful, I see no issue with it.
Well, if it's within our purview, I mean, couldn't we remove that as a condition and just state that we would expect the applicant to work with planning to meet the guidelines requisite for this type of structure?
I think that'd be perfect.
Great.
Okay. I don't think I'll be able to repeat that.
Ken will repeat
Said
it
it
for you.
really well that time.
I think she did, but I would make that motion that we accept this request for special use, subject to the site plan being submitted for review and approval, and the masonry solid waste enclosure be constructed by the dumpster, and any architectural designs be consistent with that's acceptable with the planning department. Didn't say it quite like you did.
I wouldn't be able to either. I'll second that.
I've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Been
Chairman.
approved.
I just wanted to point out, and I completely agree with Mr. Tips. The purpose of the BZA is not to be an architectural review board. But one thing that I don't want to do is set up any expectations when they submit architectural elevations as a part of their package, and I see that there might be issues with those. I don't want to set up the expectation in their mind that those are approved after the BZA gets done with them. So I completely agree with that.
Well, I mean, just for the record, I live in that area and go by that all the time. And not very far from there, we're in a commercial zone anyways. You got a Taco Bell that's got every type of imaginable siding on it, So, again, I just don't, with an institutional type building, I think it can lend itself to various looking exterior
Yes, sir.
looks to it.
Yes, sir. And we'll work with them on that after the fact.
Be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, guys. Next item is a special use permit amendment request. It's application Z20003 by Mr. Neil James for Redeemer Classical Academy. They were requesting an amendment to the special use permits that were approved by the BZA in July 2013, January 2014, and January 2015. The special use permits established an institutional group assembly use, and in this case, a private school, in a residential single-family RS10 zone. This is for property located at 1503 Sulphur Springs Road. The approval of the January 15th, 2015 special use permit amendment was conditioned upon the requirement that all portable classroom buildings must be removed from the property no later than July 31st, 2020. The applicant is requesting an amendment to the special use permit for a 2-year extension to this deadline in order to allow the portable classroom buildings to remain on-site until July 31st, 2022. Mr. Cooper, if you'd review that for us.
Good afternoon, Chairman Yon, and members of the board. That was a wonderful introduction, I must say. I just wanted to give some history because I know a lot of you haven't been on the board since the start of this project. So the original BZA application for the portable classrooms was in August of 1998, and that was for a 3-year term, and there were 4 classroom units at the time. The structures remained until 2012 when the site had become vacant. Matthew Blomley had requested that the owners remove the classrooms to come into compliance as it had been a zoning violation for 11 years at the time. Mr. Swanson, the owner of the site at the time, came through the BZA with an application in 2013 to continue the use of the classrooms for an additional 3 years so that any new tenant would be able to use them. That application was denied because there was no tenant at the time. Mr. Swanson came back later in 2013 with the tenant, I believe that was Redeemer Classical Academy, to use 3 of the original 4 portable classrooms for an additional 2 years while they looked for a site. Mr. Swanson came back in 2014 to amend the special use permit that there be a 4th temporary classroom. That was granted, but the classroom was never built. I guess they never felt the need to install that extra classroom. They came back in 2015. Victory Center Church, who was the property owner then, for an extension for 5 years in order for them to get realistic timeline to find a new site, build a new site, and move all of the classrooms to that site. And so that was set for July 31st of 2020, which is coming up. So they have asked for an additional 2 years on top of that. They haven't identified a property off of New Salem Highway. The applicant has reached out to me and said that they had a meeting with Marina Rush about a potential building on that site as a pre-application meeting. A little bit about the site. They aren't proposing any changes to the site. It is just they're asking for a timeline extension. If you wanted to show the screen up on the monitors. This is off the Sulphur Spring Rose and Meyer Drive. That we haven't, to my knowledge, received any complaints from neighboring properties. These are all residential single-family uses surrounding the property. That's a picture of one of the portable classrooms. A representative from Redeemer Classical Academy is here. He's also the applicant, and he can answer any of your questions and also speak toward the progress that they've made on acquiring a new site. I'm here for any questions, and Matthew is as well.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this point? Mr. James, anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I would add is that we have purchased property. We've got 20 acres we purchased last year off of Old Salem, and we have met with I actually met with Marina and them Monday on kind of the pre-application process and all that kind of stuff. Met with our architect. We got the architect. We're in the process of fundraising. It just took us a little bit longer to find property in Murfreesboro than we anticipated. But we have it now. We did our due diligence. We've had the Army Corps of Engineers out there to make sure we knew where the wetlands were before we purchased it. And we're ready to go. We just need time to build. So I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Any question, Mr. James? I don't think so. Thank you. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? If you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion or a motion.
I'll move to approve.
I would note that there are 3 recommended conditions of approval that just continue the same conditions from the previous one.
With the extension of the date to July 31st of 2022. And so,
Okay. I'll move to approve, subject to the conditions of approval laid out by staff.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none, so that application's been approved. All right, thank you guys. I know it's been a long road for you guys, so congratulations. Next item is any staff reports and other business.
I have none.
I don't see none. All right. With that, we will adjourn.